Welcome to the Quill and Sword, a podcast series offered by the Judge Advocate General's Legal Center and School designed to explore legal challenges from across the JAG Corps' core competencies. Today, the Center for Law and Military Operations, CLAMO, welcomes Colonel Justin Reese and Major Promotable Jason Young from the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, or JMRC. I say Major Promotable Jason Young to highlight the caliber of officer we put in these senior OCT positions. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jason Elbert, the Director of CLAMO, and we're also joined by Sergeant First Class Trey Engel, the CLAMO non-commissioned officer in charge. Colonel Reese is the Commander Operations Group at JMRC, and Jason is the JMRC Senior Legal Observer Coach Trainer, OCT. Sergeant First Class Trey Engel and I are fortunate to join these tremendous leaders in Hohenfels, Germany to record this episode. Over the next 15 or 20 minutes, we'll explore the Brigade Commander, Brigade Judge Advocate, and Brigade Legal Section relationship. Colonel Reese, thank you for joining us. After commanding at multiple levels and being in the unique position to observe brigade rotations and multinational engagements at JMRC, any initial thoughts on the value of a uniformed legal team at the brigade level?
Well, absolutely. First, I'd just like to say thanks for having me, Major Young, affording us the opportunity to contribute to this dialogue, and thanks to both you and Sergeant Engel for what you do for our Army. The military legal advisor, I think, is absolutely necessary in all phases of the life cycle of a military organization, from the garrison environment through the train up to the employment to fulfill, in our case, our Title X responsibilities, and then bringing the team back home. And that importance obviously is, because we behave and conduct ourselves in accordance with laws, rules, regulations, and policies, and they help provide guardrails to those that we may not be aware of as it comes to the conduct of our formations in combat, or those that we might not be aware of. All the options resident in our 600-20 authorities, and they are a good sounding board to help remind us of that we usually, in most set of circumstances, have a wide array of options available to us given our command authorities.
Sir, you called us a military legal advisor, and one of the things that we talked about early in our relationship was, thinking out loud and talking about ideas not on the agenda. Why is that important to you, sir?
So this relationship between the military legal advisor and a commander has got to be a relationship built on trust. And you get to that trust, not by default because somebody was slated to command in a certain brigade and a BJA was assigned in a manning cycle to that brigade. But you get to that through being able to get to know each other and how each other thinks. And it's not so the legal advisor can shape their recommendations to please their boss. It's understanding how they need to prepare themselves to present the range of options that exist to the commander and make a recommendation within those range of options. So to understand how a military legal advisor thinks, comes to a conclusion, or pursues a line of logic based on a command of the facts to get to a recommendation, it's helpful to hear them talk through that out loud. What did you take into consideration? How much weight did you apply to which aspect of the investigation? And I think it's just as helpful for that military legal advisor to hear a commander think through those aspects out loud as well. It assists, one, that military legal advisor is armed with, how a commander generally thinks about certain things, and he can help inform subordinate commanders at echelon as he's given legal advice throughout the brigade, not just to the commander. It also lends itself to creating a dialogue, not just focused on the stack of case files. We spend a lot of time talking about topics that are not associated with his stack of case files, because it gives you some pretty good insight on on a person's perspective of the world, so to speak, how they take a position in some of the law of armed conflict things we talked about, how you've taken a position, how you defend that position, sharpen your argument, and how do you get to a conclusion. And those are always helpful in being able to know that about your legal advisor. And I think it's helpful for them to know about that from the commander, so that it's not simply a transactional relationship based upon transactional meetings. Here's a recommendation to the General Court Martial Convening Authority. I just need you to sign, and then we'll get to the next one and the one after that, and then it's over.
So you said sharpen the argument, and one of the things that I appreciate about our relationship is that we're not approaching the problem from the same perspective, and we do have that back and forth, and there's not always agreement. But through that process, we're sharpening the argument. We're sharpening the decision, so you're arriving at what's the best case for the soldier and for the Army, and so. I just want to say thank you for allowing us to have that free-flowing dialogue where we're really working towards how do we make the best decision in this particular action.
In my mind, I'm always trying to balance the interests of the service member with the interests of the unit and the interests of the Army. And so that's a incident, an allegation, or an investigation is very discreet and focused on one thing. The allegation and the subject's role in regards to that. But as the options are presented to a commander, as this investigation moves through adjudication, those interests of the unit and the Army are going to come into play as well, more so than they have during the course of the investigation. So I think it's being able to have that dialogue and challenge each other is absolutely critical to ensuring that, we're maintaining precedence and good order and discipline in the organization. And two, and if I would think that you are taking a dialogue to pre-bake the cake, to sell me the recommendation I want to hear, I'd call you on that. Because, I want to be challenged as well in my approach. Because, again, a command of the facts that walks into the room with the legal advisor, he may offer up different insights, versus I hooked onto the first 2 or 3 facts of a particular investigation, and I'm ready to make a decision. And him being able to walk a commander back from that decision and offering those additional insights, is absolutely fundamental to how this thing gets adjudicated in a fair manner.
When I first came into the Army, they taught us this acronym for what you're getting at, CAV, U. You should think about the crime, the accused, the victim, and the unit as you make that decision. Gentlemen, any advice to new brigade judge advocates trying to establish that level of trust with their commander? Is that a battle rhythm event? Is it something else? How do you gain that?
Depending on how receptive their commander is, they got to fight to get that battle rhythm touch point once a week. Even if it's a high caseload or a low caseload that week, just to get that battle rhythm event in. And then also be able to establish the level of access to where if things occur outside of that, can they get into the commander to see them and inform the commander? Well, the answer should be yes, but that all has to be established in the beginning. It should be at least a weekly touch point that is protected, and it occurs every week. And then as things arise, or as updates are made, or as things just need to be moved through a process, so we're not waiting, another 7 days to go by before we can move this packet from one gate to the next. They should have the ability to do the walkthroughs in with the commanders as they see necessary.
Yes, sir. Earlier you mentioned the law of armed conflict, and I think that's one of the things that I'm passionate about. Before we started the podcast, we had a little pre-brief where we were talking about how you expect to interface with judge advocates in dispersed operations and large-scale combat operations. Could you kind of explain or describe your view on that, sir?
Yeah, my view on, with select members of my team, challenged with being distributed for the sake of survivability or just because of the inherent nature of the operation you're embarking upon, is that we focus the right people in the right place during certain events. So a battle rhythm event that usually occurs in a BCT conducting operations is a targeting cycle. Well, that would be an event that I'd want the military legal advisor to attend. There may be a critical phase of an operation during the execution of ground combat, and I may want the military legal advisor with me during that critical phase of the operation. There's no set template on where they should be and when. I think it's up to that commander to exercise his discretion as he thinks through the planning phases and then the execution of the military operation on who he needs with him, to make those critical decisions at critical moments. And sometimes those can occur in the planning process, and sometimes those occur during the execution of an operation.
And so, one of the things that I hit on a lot, and I'm thankful that you gave me the opportunity to do a law of armed conflict brief here at JMRC, T7s and above, is, during COIN, the last 20 years of COIN, lawyers and leaders in staff sections, the fire support coordinator, they got used to a lot of operational control tools that were available to us in COIN, like the collateral damage methodology and tying a CD5 decision to a certain rank. And it was able to have a lot more structure around it. But as we look forward to large-scale combat operations, kind of two questions here. One, how important do you think our LOAC training was to our OCTs so they can train the next generation on how to fight LISCO while doing it in compliance with the law? And then, second question, how would you help get lawyers out and about so they have a better understanding of what that looks like?
Yeah, for the first part, I think it was, it's absolutely invaluable, because the last time a junior officer may have seen LOAC type verbiage might have been at their commissioning source in a roundabout Army 101 class. I think it's important to provide to our junior officers and to provide to our other officers who may have an overwhelming COIN experience in the background of their career, and refreshing them on just how broad their authorities are, and then what are the guardrails to look for when conducting large-scale ground combat operations. It's invaluable, and it's probably one of those things that needs to be touched on, at least annually, if not on a semi-annual basis, based on the number of leader transitions in an organization.
How would you, as a brigade commander, how would you make sure if you have a judge advocate that maybe doesn't have the LOAC understanding or experience, how would you help develop them so they can enable your organization to conduct large-scale combat operations?
Well, one of the easiest ways is to just have a dialogue referencing vignettes, because we have the examples from history. What do you think about this? And what do you think about the employment of that? And what do you think about, because he not only, or she not only has to know what are the limits and expectations of our behavior in combat, but having an understanding of LOAC will also assist them in helping understand how that adversary will attempt to take advantage of it. And so you're seeing it, the military legal advisor, I believe, has to see it from two perspectives. Our fundamental obligations as a member of the United States Army, but then how our adversary will attempt to exploit that. And you've seen, and again, we can go back to a number of examples where whether it's using human shields or positioning weapon systems in sensitive site locations, where they're trying to manipulate LOAC in an episodic manner to take advantage of our steadfast adherence to it.
Yes, sir. I'm happy you mentioned vignettes, because that is one of the ways that we try to coach coming into JMRC. The first piece of advice that I provide to a brigade judge advocate is pull your brigade commander aside, get the FISC court in a room, get your field artillery intel officer in a room, your targeting officer in a room, and just start working through some scenarios so you can get a feel for the brigade commander's risk tolerance level, because we're in an area, with large scale combat operations, we're not going to have the well-defined guardrails that we did in COIN, and so it's really imperative on those key leaders, probably the XO and the 3 in there too, so they can see, okay, if we locate a battery of 2 S-19s in a populated area, what's the brigade commander's guidance going to be? Can we work down the HPTL here and how the brigade commander would think about authorizing fires into a populated area? So it's really good. I think we talk about hit those vignettes before you ever deploy. That way you guys have the feel. Hit them again in a targeting working group. Hit them again in the fires rehearsal, and then finally hit them in the car, the combined arms rehearsal, so everyone in the brigade can see and hear how the commander is thinking through conducting, some of the most sensitive targeting that we need to do to win in large-scale combat. If there's a CT2 node in a populated area, what kind of information is the brigade commander, the decision maker, going to need to make that call?
I think that's absolutely essential. It's as a BJA, and you go around the brigade when you arrive, and you get to meet the battalion or squadron commanders, and get to meet the other leaders at echelon that you'll be working with during your 24-month or so tour inside that brigade. It's absolutely essential that you don't just know the people, but you know the capabilities resident inside of that brigade, so that when you are working with those folks that represent those various warfighting functions, you have an appreciation for what they're actually saying when they're talking about the delivery of this ordnance or this weapon system and the impact that will have on a battlefield. And I think all of that comes out over time, and having an understanding, a really rich appreciation for the type of organization that you're a member of.
I think lawyers can be arrogant sometimes. We just think we know the law and that's good enough, but that's not the case. What can we be doing to understand what's going through the commander's mind and the capabilities to do our job better?
Well, so some of that just goes back to maybe something as simple as vignettes and trying to prompt the commander to think out loud a little bit. What are they taking into consideration? Because it's a vignette, so it's no harm, no foul. But what are they taking into consideration, based on what the 2's telling them from the intel side, based on what the 4's telling them with class 5 allocation for the battery of Alpha 7s or 777s or whatever the unit's using. So just getting repetitions with that. In the lead up to NTC for about 6 weeks, we were doing a targeting meeting based on something the 2 had designed in an NTC scenario once a week, just so that everybody got comfortable talking to each other during a targeting meeting. So we didn't spend the first 3 days with a newly arrived warrant or somebody in the intel section or a new member of the legal team trying to figure out how to talk to the commander. We'd already kind of worked our way through all that in the weeks leading up to it. And so, the vignettes, or again, those weekly touch points with the commander, hey sir, so did you see this in the news? What are your thoughts on that? I think those kind of engagements help draw some of that out of a commander and help make those staff officers or more subordinate commanders kind of more aware of what the commander's taking into account as he works to develop a decision.
Stay tuned for our part 2 of our podcast with Colonel Justin Reese and Major Jason Young from the Joint Multinational Readiness Center, JMRC. See you there.
The views expressed or implied on this podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the United States Army JAG Corps or other organizations with which the participants are associated or by whom they are employed.